mynews.studio.
In Nice, France, 18 countries have just signed onto a treaty that could change how we manage the world's oceans. The question now is, will the High Seas Treaty finally become law?
Just to set the date, it's June 12, 2025. The UN Ocean Conference is underway, and the High Seas Treaty is gaining ground. 18 more countries have joined, bringing the total to 28. That's a big jump, but we still need 60 for it to become legally binding. So what sparked this sudden burst of support?
A lot of it comes down to the European Union stepping up. Several member states followed. There's a sense of urgency right now. If the treaty doesn't hit enough ratifications before the conference ends, it could lose steam. And here's why it matters. Almost half the planet's surface, the high seas, could finally be managed under a single legal framework to protect marine life.
And right now, only about 1% of those waters are actually protected. That's barely anything considering the biodiversity out there. The treaty's official name is quite a mouthful: the Agreement on the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBNJ for short. But really, it's about giving countries the tools to create protected areas, regulate fishing and shipping, and even manage deep-sea mining. But how do these rules actually get enforced?
So, the treaty will create a conference of the parties, a kind of global oversight committee. It also requires environmental impact assessments for any activity that might harm marine biodiversity. Plus, there'll be a public database so anyone can track what's going on. Monitoring is tricky, though. The plan is to use satellite tracking, vessel monitoring, international inspections.
But will countries actually report violations themselves? Or is it more about outside checks?
Good question. There's some hope that transparency and international oversight will encourage countries to cooperate. But in the end, enforcement depends on political will. And another big challenge is making sure developing countries can actually participate. The EU, for example, pledged 40 million euros to help them with technology, training, and funding. Without that, a lot of countries wouldn't even be able to ratify or enforce the treaty. Why is this kind of support so critical?
Well, many developing nations simply don't have the resources to monitor their own waters, let alone the high seas. With more funding and technology, they can get access to scientific data, do environmental assessments, and actually enforce rules. That means they get a real say in how marine protected areas are managed.
Let's look at the impact. Setting up new marine protected areas could really change how fishing, shipping, and mining work. Some countries rely on those industries for jobs and food. So if protected areas mean less fishing, what happens to food security? To local economies?
It's a balancing act. In the short term, restrictions might mean less access to fishing grounds. But the long-term idea is to rebuild fish stocks and make ecosystems more resilient. That, in theory, leads to stronger fisheries and more reliable food supplies. The treaty talks about adaptive management and getting stakeholders involved at every step. But is that enough to keep both conservation and economies healthy?
It's not a sure thing. Success really depends on ongoing negotiation and trust between countries, industries, communities. Still, this treaty is the world's first attempt to create a global system to manage the high seas. If it works, it could be a model for other environmental agreements. But if it fails, do we risk losing one of the planet's last wild spaces?
The stakes are high. The High Seas Treaty could shape not just ocean health, but food security, biodiversity, and international cooperation for years to come.
That really gets to the heart of it. This isn't only about fish or shipping routes. It's about whether nations can work together on problems that cross every border.
Thanks for joining us as we followed the High Seas Treaty's push for ratification, the roadblocks ahead, and what's at stake for everyone, whether you live by the ocean or far from it.
The treaty is at a crossroads. Will countries meet the deadline and make history? We'll be watching closely.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.